How a learner organizes knowledge during the learning process is also very closely related to their level of engagement with learning, which depends on both the learner and the instructor. By level of learning engagement, we're referring to the amount of thinking and reasoning that's taking place during the learning process. And it's shown on this conceptual graph as ranging from very low engagement, which would just be memorizing facts, to the extreme of high engagement that would represent evaluating the validity of information or deriving theories from it. On the x-axis, we can plot a couple of different things related to the nature of the activity that the learner is required to undertake. At one extreme end could just be sitting passively in a lecture, and the other could be being fully active in small group problem solving during class time. These required learner activities are essentially tied to how the instructor chooses to design the class session, where they're focusing on transmission of information versus having the students construct knowledge and understanding on their own. So let's start by thinking about that passive lecture circumstance. There are certainly a lot of learners that just sort of sit there and listening, sometimes distracted and not on task, and maybe taking notes, thinking that they're going to have to memorize this information. Their engagement is going to be fairly low. Now, other students might, in the same lecture hall, engage with this material in a very different way. And you can detect these learners, and they're the ones that have quizzical looks on their faces and have expressions that indicate that they're actually thinking through what's being said. They're not simply listening and repeating on notes. They may also be the ones that interrupt with great questions because they're actually trying to make connections with what they know and what's being presented. So they're in the same room, but they're experiencing the same learning opportunity, but they're engaging with it in a very different way. And these two different types of learners have been named in the literature. There's the distinction between deep learners and surface learners. And the deep learners are the ones that are making connections of bits and pieces of information on their own. They're able to explain things and apply the knowledge they're taking in because they're organizing it. So going back to our cartoon, we might imagine the surface learner is just looking at the incoming bits and pieces of information as stuff to be memorized somehow or recorded in the notes. The deeper learner is making connections and seeing how to chunk the information. However, let's go to the opposite end of our required activity graph on the x-axis and look at an active group problem solving session. In this case, everybody's engaged not just in listening, but in trying to explain the information to one another and applying it, maybe using it to make judgments about some decisions that would be made with the information. And so everybody's going to be asked to be functioning at a higher level, given the nature of the prompts and the interactivity between them, regardless of whether their general approach is surface or deep. So as we would go across the graph, we might imagine different trajectories for deep learners and surface learners in response to the type of activity and instruction that's being presented. And that the more we bring active learning in, the smaller the gap in learning that's just based on the learner characteristics. So instructional design can have a key role in helping to organize knowledge and improve learning. The distinction between a deep learner and a surface learner, that learning approach, is a function of a number of things, such as motivation, aptitude, prior knowledge of both the content and how learning takes place. And motivation, which is that first item there in the function, is going to be our topic next week. And in many cases, at least among university faculty, the issue of learner approach is sometimes simply a matter of blaming it on whether or not the student is a good student. But other factors may be at play. And the types of learners that are captured in this schematic graph are equated to characters, academic Susan and non-academic Robert, in the optional short video series that's linked in this week's module called Teaching, Teaching, and Understanding, Understanding.